Before any movement begins, before any dream becomes real, before any leader inspires another soul, there is a spark, a moment, a question that shifts everything. Why? But most people never slow down long enough to ask it. We rush into careers, relationships, responsibilities, chasing a path someone else drew for us. And then we wonder why we feel lost, tired, or disconnected. The origin of the why is not found in the noise of the world. It's found in the quiet honesty within us. And until we rediscover it, we continue to drift. Today, we don't have the luxury of drifting. The world needs people who know what they stand for, who they serve, and why they show up. Because when you find your why, decisions become clearer, relationships become stronger, and life gains alignment. So let's go back, not forward, back to the beginning, back to the origin. Because the future you want depends on the clarity you choose right now. The first moment your life spoke to you wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, almost whispered, but it carried a truth you've been trying to remember ever since. Every man has a moment like this, early in life, when something inside stirs, when curiosity awakens, when a sense of direction flickers for the first time. It's the moment you felt drawn to something for no logical reason at all. A hobby, a challenge, a responsibility, a dream, long before expectations stacked themselves on your shoulders, before the world handed you labels, rules, and roles. There was an instinct calling you toward who you were meant to become. But as men grow older, that voice gets quiet because the world gets loud. Men are conditioned to be providers, fixers, protectors, roles that are valuable, even necessary, but often incomplete. Society teaches men to measure their worth by output, not by intention, by strength, not by alignment, by achievement, not by purpose. And somewhere in that transition, the early spark, the original why, gets buried under responsibility, pressure, and the fear of falling short. What once felt like a pull becomes a distant memory because men are taught to move forward with force, not reflect with curiosity. Yet women often see this moment in men more clearly than men do themselves. Women tend to observe the emotional landscape, the unspoken motivations, the hidden fears, the quiet desires. They notice when a man is acting from passion versus obligation, when he's aligned versus when he's lost. They see how his early spark shaped him, even if he pretends it no longer matters. Women often understand that a man's deepest drive is rooted not in what he does, but in what originally moved him before he learned to hide it. And whether they say it out loud or not, they feel the difference between a man who knows his why and a man who's still searching for it. That early moment, the one many men dismiss as childish or insignificant, is actually the first blueprint of identity. It's the emotional DNA that reveals what energizes him, what gives him pride, and what allows him to feel purposeful rather than pressured. When a man looks back at that moment, he isn't chasing nostalgia, he's recovering clarity. He's reconnecting with what made him feel alive, not just useful. And when a man reclaims that origin point, he doesn't just rediscover direction, he regains himself. Purpose isn't something you stumble upon one day. It's something that's been silently shaping you long before you had the language to express it. Every man carries an internal compass that was calibrated in childhood through moments of excitement, curiosity, or even frustration. Those weren't random feelings. They were signals. They were the first indicators of what mattered to you before the expectations of adulthood trained you to ignore them. What men often call finding purpose is actually the process of stripping away the layers that never belonged to them in the first place. But the world teaches men that purpose must be earned rather than uncovered. Men are told they must chase titles, accumulate achievements, and constantly prove themselves before they're allowed to feel fulfilled. So they look outward towards success, approval, accomplishment, believing purpose is somewhere ahead of them instead of already within them. This outward chase makes a man feel like he's always behind, always lacking, always competing with an invisible standard. And because he's been conditioned to stay strong and keep moving, he rarely stops long enough to ask if the direction he's running in even belongs to him. Yet women often recognize this truth long before men do. Women can sense when a man is living in alignment versus when he is just performing a role. They notice the shift in his energy when he talks about something that lights him up versus something he has to do. They feel when he's acting from authenticity versus expectation. From their vantage point, it's clear that his purpose isn't lost. It's simply buried under responsibilities he never questioned and identities he never chose. And while women can't give a man his purpose, they can often see the clues he's been overlooking. The power of remembering is that it reconnects a man with the parts of himself he abandoned to fit the mold the world handed him. When a man remembers his purpose, he isn't discovering something new. He's reclaiming what he once felt before doubt, fear, and pressure took over. He begins to recognize the patterns, the themes that keep showing up in his interests, his strengths, and even his struggles. These are the breadcrumbs leading him back to his why. And when a man finally follows those clues, he doesn't feel like he's reinventing himself. He feels like he's returning home to the identity that was. Always his. The greatest obstacles to understanding our why are not a lack of intelligence or opportunity, but the myths we absorb long before we ever question them. Men are taught from a young age that purpose is something external, something grand, impressive, or world-changing. This myth convinces them that if their dream doesn't look heroic or extraordinary, it isn't meaningful. So instead of listening inward, they chase outward symbols of success, hoping one of them will eventually feel like purpose. But no achievement, no matter how shiny, can replace the quiet truth they've ignored, the myth of self-sufficiency. Convinces men that they must figure out their why alone. They grow up hearing messages like man up, don't be weak, and deal with it yourself, which train them to hide uncertainty rather than explore it. This belief traps men in silence, making them feel like confusion is a flaw rather than a signal. In reality, purpose becomes clearer through conversation, reflection, and connection, not through isolation. But when a man believes he must carry everything himself, he will hold his questions so tightly that he never uncovers the answers. Women often see how destructive this myth is because they watch men wrestle with pressures they refuse to talk about. Women notice when a man's silence isn't strength but exhaustion, when his distance isn't independence but overwhelm. They can sense when he's trying to uphold a myth rather than express a truth. And from their perspective, the idea that men must figure it all out alone doesn't make a man strong. It makes him disconnected from his own why. Women often wish men understood that sharing the struggle doesn't weaken them. It reveals the depth of their humanity. Another powerful myth tells men that busyness is the same as purpose. If a man is constantly working, constantly grinding, constantly striving, he else productive, even if he's moving in the wrong direction. The world rewards men for momentum, not alignment. But busyness creates noise, and noise buries clarity. A man may spend years sprinting without realizing he's running from emptiness rather than toward meaning. And because he equates motion with value, slowing down feels dangerous, even though it's the only way to hear the truth beneath the chaos. The most damaging myth of all is the belief that purpose must be earned. This idea keeps men constantly proving, constantly performing, constantly measuring themselves against impossible standards. But a man, why isn't something he qualifies for? It's something he remembers when he finally lets go of the myths that kept him distracted for far too long. The cost of living without direction doesn't show up all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, and often invisibly. For many men, it begins as a subtle discomfort, a feeling that something is off, even if life looks perfectly fine on the outside. They work hard, take on responsibilities, and fulfill expectations, yet feel an inner drift they can't explain. This drift becomes a silent weight that follows them into their careers, relationships, and private moments, creating a tension between who they are and who they're pretending to be. Without direction, a man doesn't feel empty because he lacks success. He feels empty because he lacks alignment. The mind of a man pays a high price when his actions aren't connected to a deeper why. He becomes reactive instead of intentional, driven by demands instead of purpose. Decisions feel heavier, motivation becomes inconsistent, and even achievements lose their meaning quickly. Men in this state often describe feeling tired even when they're not physically exhausted, because psychological fatigue comes from doing what doesn't resonate. When a man operates without direction, he's not working harder, he's working against himself, and that creates a quiet erosion of confidence and clarity. Women often sense this internal struggle long before men acknowledge it. They notice the way a man becomes emotionally distant, easily irritated or disconnected from the things that once made him vibrant. They see the heaviness behind his silence, the restlessness behind his productivity, the uncertainty behind his strength. To many women, the issue isn't that a man lacks ambition, it's that he lacks a path that reflects who he truly is. And while they may try to support him, encourage him, or help him open up, they also feel the strain of watching someone they care about drift without anchoring themselves to something meaningful. The emotional toll grows even stronger when a man starts confusing motion with progress. He pushes harder, takes on more, and keeps himself constantly busy, believing that activity will eventually reveal direction. But all it reveals is burnout. The more he fills his schedule, the more he avoids the stillness required for clarity. Over time, he begins to question his worth, not because he isn't valuable, but because he's disconnected from the reason his value exists in the first place. Living without direction doesn't just cost a man peace, it costs him the opportunity to become who he was always meant to be. Clarity is the rare force that transforms uncertainty into power, because when a man knows his why, he stops second-guessing every step he takes. Most men spend years trying to build confidence through achievement, strength, or performance, believing confidence is something that appears only after they earn. But confidence doesn't come from accomplishment, it comes from alignment. When a man understands what drives him at his core, his decisions become simpler, his actions become bolder, and his sense of self becomes anchored. Clarity doesn't just steady a man, it liberates him from the fear of choosing wrong. The mind of a man becomes sharper and more decisive when he knows the direction he's moving toward. Instead of hesitating or needing validation, he develops the inner conviction that his choices are guided by something deeper than impulse. With clarity, he stops comparing himself to other men because he finally recognizes that he's not running their race. He's running his own. This shift is powerful. It removes envy, eliminates doubt, and replaces insecurity with purpose. A man with clarity isn't louder or tougher, he's simply rooted. And that rootedness makes him unshakable in a world that constantly tries to pull him off course. Women often observe this transformation with remarkable insight. They see how a man's energy changes when he speaks from clarity instead of confusion. They notice the difference between ambition driven by pressure and ambition driven by purpose. Women can feel when a man's confidence is grounded in authenticity rather than ego, because it shows up in the way he carries himself, makes decisions, and interacts with others. From their perspective, clarity doesn't just make a man more confident, it makes him more present, more trustworthy, and more emotionally consistent. They can sense when a man is moving with intention rather than drifting through expectation. The beauty of clarity is that it strengthens a man's resilience long before he faces any adversity. Challenges still come, criticism still happens, setbacks still occur, but they no longer shake him at the foundation. Instead of questioning himself, he evaluates the situation, instia. D, of collapsing under pressure, he adapts. Instead of retreating, he recalibrates. Clarity gives him a compass he can depend on when everything around him feels uncertain. And that compass gives him the courage to keep going, even when the path gets difficult. A man who understands his why doesn't need to pretend to be confident, because confidence becomes a natural byproduct of direction. He acts with intention, speaks with conviction, and shows up with consistency. He no longer performs strength, he embodies it. And in a world full of noise, doubt, and distraction, nothing is more powerful than a man who knows exactly what he stands for and why he's here. Your why becomes a gift the moment you realize it was never meant to be kept to yourself. Most men grow up believing that purpose is personal, an internal journey, a private compass, something that exists solely to guide their own decisions. But the truth is far more powerful. A man's why is not just about what he wants to do with his life. It's about what his life enables in others. The clarity he gains, the resilience he builds, and the values he stands for all become a source of strength for the people around him. Purpose doesn't just shape the man, it shapes the world he touches. The most overlooked truth is that someone else is already waiting for the impact only you can create. Men often underestimate their influence because they've been conditioned to measure their worth through results, not presence. They think they have to accomplish something massive before they matter. But the people who need you, your partner, your family, your friends, your community, aren't waiting for you to be perfect. They're waiting for you to be aligned. A man who knows his why shows up differently, clearer, calmer, more grounded. His presence becomes a source of stability that others naturally gravitate toward, and without realizing it, he becomes the example that gives others permission to find their own path. Women often feel the impact of a man's why long before he recognizes it himself. They notice the shift in his behavior when he's connected to meaning versus when he's wandering without direction. They see how he communicates more openly, carries himself with clarity, and engages with greater emotional presence. Women can sense when a man is living with purpose because it shows up not only in what he does, but in how he loves. To them, a man why isn't just an internal identity. It becomes a form of leadership, a source of emotional safety, and a reflection of how deeply he understands himself. The remarkable thing is that your why fills a void that someone else cannot fill alone. Every man has a unique way of seeing the world, solving problems, supporting others, or offering guidance. That uniqueness isn't random. It's needed. There is someone struggling in an area where your natural strengths are their exact missing piece. There is someone searching for encouragement you are uniquely prepared to give. There is someone who will feel seen, understood, or empowered simply because you decided to step into who you were always meant to be. When a man hides from his why, he isn't just withholding purpose from himself. He's withholding support from those who would benefit from it. The deeper truth is that your why becomes most powerful when it moves beyond self-interest and becomes an act of service. Men feel the strongest sense of fulfillment when their purpose creates value for others, when their clarity turns into contribution. It might be the way you lead, the way you mentor, the way you love, the way you protect, or the way you inspire. Whatever form it takes, your why becomes a gift the moment it lifts someone else. And the world around you, especially the people closest to you, are quietly waiting for you to step into that role. There is a person somewhere in your life or your future who will only find their strength because you found your purpose first. There is someone whose confidence will rise because you chose direction. There is someone who will believe in themselves because they saw what belief looked like in you. And that is why your why was never meant to remain hidden. It was meant to be given,